The book that I hold in my hand claims to be inspired by God. That men wrote it down, about 40 different authors over a period of 1,500 years. They wrote down this book by God's direction and inspiration. And the words that we have written in this book are what God ordained them to be. Now, that may seem like circular reasoning, but let me explain why I believe it's one of the best proofs of God that there is. Good morning. If you would go ahead and open your Bibles to Romans chapter 1. We're going to be starting there this morning. When I was a child, when I was younger, I got into scouting. And the motto of the Boy Scouts is be prepared. And I kind of took that maybe too much to heart. I tend to overpack and over-prepare. I think I needed to go on a few of the high-adventure backpacking trips to kind of learn to know that less is more. So this morning, what I want us to do is I want us to prepare to take a journey. Now, maybe you're like Bilbo Baggins. Maybe you did not come this morning thinking that you were going to go on a journey. But I, like Gandalf, come to you and I set in motion a series of events that hopefully will change your life for the better. Maybe you don't want to go on a journey. Well, my goal this morning is to help you want to go on the journey that I want to take you on. So that's my goal. By the end of this sermon, I want you to be as eager and excited about what lays ahead as I am. I propose that we take a journey to discover God. That we set out and that we put our minds and our energy into discovering who God is. And I hope that you will join with me, and I hope that you want to know that as much as I do. Before you can begin any journey, you have to kind of know where you're going, how you're going to get there, and if there is even a place. So really the first question we need to ask as we begin this journey is there a God to discover? Is there a God? Now, I want to preface this first part of the sermon. I will not prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. If you are struggling with this question, I will not answer it effectively. I'm going to give you 3 reasons why I believe that God exists. And if you want more information on these points, please come talk to me. Okay? I don't have enough time this morning. If we could go until 2:30 today, I could unpack this, but I can't unpack this all this morning. I want to start off by saying, in this discovery of is there a God, that science cannot prove God, but it can point to Him. And that should not make us in any way scared as Christians. Let me explain why I say that. See, the scientific method is that you form a hypothesis, you form an idea of what the world is made of, what is going on, and then you come up with a way to collect data, a way to make experiments that can be testable and can be repeatable. And then you form a conclusion from that collection of data. That is the scientific method. But God cannot be put in a laboratory. The way that God proves Himself is through miracles, through visions, through interactions with people. But see, that should not concern us. That should not make us worried, because history is the same way. History cannot be put in a laboratory. History cannot be proven by science, but science can point us towards the truth of what took place in history. But God, by His very nature, is outside of the realms of nature. Think of the sea. It's quite large. It's a force to be reckoned with. If you've seen any footage from a hurricane or a major storm, the sea is quite a strength to be forced with. But we can, as humans, can create items that will allow us to sail atop the ocean, that we can hold back the ocean, and we can go underneath the ocean. We can conquer the seas. Now, sometimes the seas win, sometimes we win. That makes the sea a bad god. The sea cannot be a god. So, when we look at history, we can't prove the Civil War scientifically. We can't prove World War II scientifically. That doesn't mean they didn't happen. It doesn't make science bad. It just means there's limitations to science. Look over there in Romans chapter 1. In Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 18, we read this. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth by unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident to them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, His eternal power, and His divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that men are without excuse. So the first thing that Paul talks about here is righteousness, justice. There is something deep within us that we understand what justice is. Walk up to any 2-year-old and take their toy. They're going to be offended that you have wronged them. They understand this concept of righteousness, of justice. Anytime somebody walks into a school or a church or a place of work and they shoot up the place, we cry out for justice. We shake our fists and say, "Where was God?" There is something deep within us that knows that justice is a thing, that it's something beyond us, it's something beyond our laws. Now, like I said, there's so much that we can unpack here. If you want more information on this point, come talk to me. But I believe that the justice that is deep within us, or the sense of justice, proves God. The other thing that proves God is nature. It proclaims God. You look out at the mountains, and they proclaim the glory of God. You look at the ecosystem that we live in, and it proclaims the glory of God. Its complexity, its ability to adapt. Even look at the animals, whether it be the elk or the little bitty insect. The complexity and the perfection found within them points to a creator, an intelligence of design, something that supersedes what could happen by natural processes. Look over, if you will, at Psalm 19. In Psalm 19, starting in verse 1, we read this: "The heavens declare the glory of God. The expanse declares the works of His hands. Day to day they pour forth speech, and night to night they reveal knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words where their voice is not heard." So if the mountains aren't enough to show you that God is God and that He exists, then look at the stars, at the vastness of the universe. And the further we're able to look, the more amazing the universe that we live in is. Declaring across languages, across cultures, that there is something beyond us. In Psalm 139, starting in verse 13, we read this: "For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I am thankful to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows them very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were written all the days that were ordained for me, when they were yet, and none of them were." So if the vastness of the skies does not prove to you that God exists, if the wonder of nature that's all around you is not enough, then look deep within the human body, look at the cells, look at the microorganisms that live all around us, and see the complexity that direction. The longer and the further that science looks, the more God proclaims Himself through His creation. Like I said, there's a whole lot here to unpack. So if you have questions about this, don't leave here with questions. Please come talk to me, email me, talk to me. I will help you walk through this to a point where you're satisfied. But this is all the time we have for that this morning. The last reason that I believe that God exists comes out of 2 Timothy. Look over there. 2 Timothy chapter 3, starting in verse 16. "All Scripture is inspired by God, and it is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be adequately equipped for every good work." The book that I hold in my hand claims to be inspired by God, that men wrote it down, about 40 different authors over a period of 1,500 years. They wrote down this book by God's direction and inspiration. And the words that we have written in this book are what God ordained them to be. Now, that may seem like circular reasoning, but let me explain why I believe it's one of the best proofs of God that there is. See, we can look at the Bible like any book from antiquity. When we look at a book from antiquity, we know about when most books were written, if we have a copy of them. And then we have the nearest copy of that, because there's normally a large separation. Any book from antiquity, we have at least several hundred years separating our nearest copy from the original. And then we have a collection of those copies, and we can compare those and get back to what we believe was the original. Let me give you an example. Caesar Gallic's wars were written by Caesar as he conquered Galatia. And he wrote down his escapades. There's 800 years separating our nearest copy from the original. And we have about 300 copies of what he wrote down. And there is no historian who doubts that what we have in our hands of that document is what he wrote down. Now, we may differ on what exactly happened. He may have been boasting here. He wasn't honest there. But what we have is what was written. The Bible is in a league of its own. The New Testament alone, which was written about 50 AD all the way to 70 AD. I don't think anything was written after the fall of Jerusalem. We have, from that time, a 350-year gap until we have our nearest copy, complete copy of the New Testament. And from that age period, we have about 500 manuscripts that we can look at. If we go as far as the 17th century, we have over 6,000. That's just Greek manuscripts. That is not counting the Latin Vulgate and all the copies of the Latin or any other language from antiquity. That takes it up into multiple thousands. When you consider the fact that the Bible was a hated book in its time, that it was sought out to be destroyed, and we have that many copies, I believe that that tells me that the Bible has been divinely protected and passed down to us today. So I believe that the fact that we have a Bible in our hand and that we can trust it as well as we can, and that it's so overwhelmingly historically accurate from a historicity standpoint, is proof that God exists. And like I said, if you are not convinced, if you're hung up on that one, come talk to me. I want to unpack this, but that's all the time I can devote to it this morning, or we'll be here all day. So if there is then a God, the question we must then ask is this: what is God? Is He a glorified man? Is He an alien? Is He created? Is He not created? What is God? Well, there's been some interaction with humans and God in the past. If you look over in Exodus chapter 3, we read this. Moses said, "I am who I am." He said, "Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you." When God says, "I am who I am," He's saying, I'm the existing one. So God is claiming to be the existing one, someone who has always existed. He didn't have a beginning. He doesn't have an end. He is simply existing. Jesus tells us in John chapter 4, starting in verse 24, God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. So if God is spirit and He's an eternally existing being, then that puts Him beyond us. That puts Him in a different realm of different rules applying to Him. Lastly, we can look at Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 26. Turn over there. Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 26. Then the Lord said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our own likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over everything that is on the earth, and over all the creeping things that creep on the earth." God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created them. Male and female He created them. So God then created us in His image. Not we didn't make God in our image. We're not made in God's not made in our image. We're made in the image of God. So if God is spirit and eternally existing, then the image that God is talking about here cannot be what we see in the mirror. It goes much deeper than the flesh. It goes much deeper than the facial structures and the way that our body is designed. So this tells us something about what God is, an eternally existing being that is spirit. And yet we are made in some way like Him. We are His painting. We are His bust, as it were, of God. Well, the question then becomes, if God exists, and if we are made similar to Him, and yet He's so far above us, can we even know Him? Is there any hope if we go on this journey that we can find out who God is? Well, let's unpack that. Turn over to Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 55. Isaiah 55, starting in verse 6. Isaiah says this, "Seek the Lord while He may be found. Call upon Him while He is near. Let the wicked forsake his ways, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. And let him return to the Lord, and He will have compassion upon him. And to our God He will abundantly pardon." So Isaiah says that God can be found, that He is near, that we can seek Him, and that we can find Him. But Isaiah gives us a warning as well. Look at verse 8. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways, declare the Lord. For as high as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return without watering the earth, and making it bear and sprout, and furnishing seeds to the sower, and the bread to the eater." So God is above us. He is beyond us. We should not bring God down to our level. We should not make Him appear. So He may be able to be found, but He is far beyond us. Isaiah finishes with this. He says, "So my word will not go forth from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, without accomplishing what I desire it, and without succeeding in the matter to which I sent it." So God sends out His word so that we can know Him. God comes to us and allows us to know Him. He's above us, but He's able to be found. So the question then becomes, can we know God? Yes. Yes, we can. But understand that He is far above and beyond us. So, who is God? If He can be found, if we know a little bit about Him, then who is He? What's He like? I'm glad you asked that question, because that's exactly what we're going to be doing over the next year. We're going to spend time pouring our lives into seeking to know who this God is. And I invite you to join us on that journey, and I hope that you will be excited about that journey. So how do we take all of this, and how do we apply it to our lives? Well, we can dive deeply into the Word of God. We can seek to know Him with all that we are. We can surround ourselves with like-minded people who will help us on this journey. And we can come back next week as we begin this journey, as we set out to discover who God really is. So the question is, will you? Will you, like Bilbo Baggins, wake up and realize that you have an opportunity before you? Will you allow yourself to go on this adventure with zeal and with passion? Right? Will you go, or will you be satisfied to just stay in the Shire? Which will you do? Will you go with excitement? Will you go hesitantly, with reserve? Will you refuse to go at all? The decision is yours.